And I love this building. Fred Campbell, who was one of our interim ministers, said the first time he walked in here, he saw that it was an unexpected celebration of the vertical. And I like that description. Good morning. Welcome to our All Souls Indy service, which is being held in person and is also being streamed. I'm Diane Kennedy, your worship associate today. And I'm so glad to see everyone who's here and think about everyone who is streaming. I'm sure you're all glad to be in here in whatever way you are participating. All Souls strives to be an inclusive congregation where we do our best to live the elements of our covenant. Years ago on the sign, it used to say where reason and religion meet. Now perhaps a more up-to-date way would be saying where science and spirituality meet. But it's a place for those of us who may find ourselves a little lost or out of place in other houses of worship. A place where we can come to our own terms with our spirituality. We put love in action by forming community, a place where we can be safe with each other. We help those less fortunate, and we work to aid the environment. Like all other All Souls services, we can bring our whole selves here. Relax, feel support of like-minded people, a place where we have community. Good morning.
At this time, Lily Kennedy will light our chalice as we recite our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant.
Our theme this month is Holding History, and today Reverend Joel is going to talk about touchstones. When I think of the word touchstone, I think of something solid that we can go back to in order to renew ourselves, something that will withstand harsh conditions. In our worship associate meeting, or in our pre-worship meeting, Reverend Joel suggested that I consider what is precious and endearing to me about All Souls. After giving that some thought, I've concluded that it is the enduring nature of All Souls that I can go back to. I drifted away from the church for about 20 years and then came back 7 or so years ago. My first time back, there were still people who recognized me and were glad to see me. If some of you were in the sanctuary last week, you could see the delight of other people returning to the building. It felt like coming home. It still does. I am uplifted merely by the presence of being here. And in thinking about how I was welcomed back, it reminded me of my cousin mentioning when she left her church, how she had been a deacon and that nobody reached out to her to ask her why she wasn't in church. And it occurred to me that when I drifted away, nobody called me and asked me why I wasn't here. And if somebody had, I might have come back a lot sooner. So I am thinking that perhaps you could consider, and I could consider, getting a hold of somebody you haven't seen or followed on Zoom when we were Zooming. And just ask them if there's something that you can do or if there's a reason why they aren't here, and inviting them to come back. It means so much to us to be here, it might mean a lot for them to come back. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm going to start that again. Don't have COVID today. I did the test this morning. It's so much easier just to communicate with you without the mask on. So I have a story this morning, a true story, about when I was a kid. I grew up in the jewelry business when I was a child, like Elias's age. And I helped out in the jewelry business. When I was very young, I would help out by doing some cleaning, or when I got a little older, I would help gift wrap Christmas presents. When I got a little older, I think it was about 9 or 10, my dad had me do some testing of old jewelry that he had bought from people to make sure it was the quality of gold that it was stamped with. So if it was stamped as 14 karat, I would do this test. It was called the acid test. And this is how the acid test works. The acid test, you have a stone, actually, maybe just a little bigger than this little box of matches. And you take the piece of jewelry and you rub it on the stone. Then you have these needles, and at the tip of each of the needles is gold of various known qualities. 10 karat, 14 karat, 18 karat, 22 karat, even pure gold. And you look at the gold and say, I think it looks like it's 14 karat. So you rub some 10 karat on one side and some 18 karat on the other side. And then you do the acid test, where you take some nitric acid. It's pretty powerful stuff, nitric acid. And you swipe it across these marks you've made on the stone. And when you've done that, it dissolves everything in the gold that's not gold. So in the scratch. So if you have 18 karat, it looks the same color as the 18 karat that you scratched right next to it. And if it's 14 karat, it looks kind of like it's in the middle, and if it's 10 karat, it looks like the 10 karat. And if the middle scratch that you made with the jewelry you're not sure about, if it turns green and bubbles up, there's no gold at all in that. So I loved being able to do that test when I was a kid. And one particular day I was going through, I had to go through like 50 pieces of jewelry of older jewelry, just to make sure it was what had been stamped. Because in the business, we wanted to be very sure that if we were going to resell it, or if we were going to melt it down and make new jewelry out of it, it was what we said it was. The acid test is a test that's very, very old. It's thousands of years old. When it was very, very old, it was a secret test. And you weren't supposed to know about it. Alchemists were the only people supposed to know about the acid test. But now we've come to know what an acid test is. Actually, nowadays you don't even have to do an acid test. They have these electronic things. You just put it on the jewelry. Tells you what the metals are. But I loved the acid test. And there's The acid test is a real thing, but we sometimes use the words acid test or touchstone, which is the name of the stone that you do the scratches on. And a touchstone, sometimes we use the term touchstone to talk about something that we can go back to that helps us understand bigger pictures or understand something that's been important in a long part of our life, or maybe all of our lives. A touchstone shows us something that doesn't change, or itself is something that doesn't really change. And the acid test is a way of looking at, okay, what endures and what disappears when you really put it to the test. In interim times with congregations, that's always a really important question for a congregation. What for all souls endures? What do you think will be enduring? And what things change across the years, the days, the years, the generations? It's always a great question. We'll be talking a lot about that question actually this winter. The life of a community is to be known for who we are and the lives that we're living. It's why we share joys and sorrows together. It makes them more understandable, shapes the meaning of our lives more fully. And when it's really hard, just makes it easier to bear. There are those among us who are struggling with health issues. We hold them close to our thoughts or to our hearts, wishing them health and healing and well-being. Especially this morning, are holding Greg Sanders close. Fortunately, the fire he had in his house did no damage, but it did mean the fire trucks showed up. He had a lot going on this morning. Thanks, Liz, for playing. I'm talking about humanism this morning, and I'll explain more what that is if you don't know what it is. And as I offer this meditation and prayer, I invite you to join me in a spirit of contemplation or thought or well wishes, as feels appropriate to you. Spirit of life. We don't know what it means truly to be with one another, and how there then comes to be something greater. We don't know. Some of us think it's God. Some of us think it's culture. Some of us don't think it happens at all. And it matters that we're here. Maybe we'll never know exactly how or why. But we know it makes a difference. So we give thanks for the people sitting next to us, each of them unique in their experiences, in their beliefs, in their joys and their sorrows. We give thanks for this beautiful place, made possible by spiritual ancestors. Some we will never know. We give thanks for our children who will carry on from us and this community the best we have to give them. And in turn, bless lives we can't even imagine, and people we will never know. Let the mystery of this being, this gathering, let it not vex us, but let us be grateful for what it gives us, and for an existence in which there are mysteries yet to be known, to be discovered, to be answered. Amen.
We're actually going to do the offertory before the sermon. Each week, All Souls shares the cash or specifically earmarked donations collected on Sunday. Half of the donations this week will go to Indie Pride. Indie Pride produces events which educate and celebrate the diversity of the Indianapolis lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community. It exists to unite and serve our members, or the members, and the LGBTQ plus community of Central Indiana through programs and events which achieve inclusivity, equality, strong community connections, and awareness of relevant issues. It's best known for the Indie Pride Festival and Parade, and it also does other philanthropic work throughout Central Indiana, including scholarships, facilitating educational events, working in partnership with Circle City Pride Softball, LGBT Film Fest, and Pride Volleyball. You can place cash or checks made out to All Souls in the baskets that will be going around. If you're watching the broadcast, please visit allsoulsindy.org, where you will find a link that says Give to All Souls here on the left side. Donations given to All Souls on the website will also be split with the organization. Thank you for your generosity in supporting the mission of All Souls and for your continued support of Indy Pride and the LGBTQ community in Central Indiana. May we now accept our morning offering. And I realized that Reverend Joel has his rainbow. Is that a surplus? Stole, okay. This is as close as I could come, but I want one of those. So.
Theme for for services this month is history. And if I'm going to talk about All Souls, I have to talk about humanism. What is humanism? Humanism, I think humanism at All Souls means this. We search to live good lives and to do it without dogma, and using the best tools, the tools that are our minds and our hearts, the tools that are reason and compassion and religion. Now, there are other kinds of humanism in the United States. There's secular humanism, there's atheistic humanism, there's actually Christian humanism, there's all kinds of humanism, Jewish humanism. But the oldest kind of humanism is religious humanism, and that's the kind that is rooted here in All Souls. And in fact, the oldest form of American humanism is religious humanism, which actually started in Unitarian Universalist congregations, including All Souls, this congregation. So 120 years ago, it was amazing what science was doing. We had learned as human beings to put things in like clean water systems and sewage systems to take the water away when we were done with it. We'd learned how to heat our homes and our buildings. We were learning even how to cool them, how to transport food safely and bring it to homes safely. It was amazing. Science was saving so many lives. And it became kind of confusing for some folks, because they would go to church and they were told the only way to truly understand anything was to read it in the Bible or to hear it from the church authorities. And folks found they were supposed to believe in things that made no scientific sense, or actually had never made any sense to them or their ancestors. A lot of those people left their churches or their temples or their mosques, and they just could no longer believe what seemed impossible to believe. And then they discovered Unitarian churches or Universalist churches, places like All Souls. Not only did they have to believe in impossible things, but they didn't have to even believe in a God, which was a big deal 120 years ago. Many of these people began to call themselves humanists. Our Unitarian Universalist humanists began to meet. Some of those early meetings were actually in the building of this congregation when it was downtown on Alabama Street. They had met and talked long enough that they formed a Humanist Institute, and in 1933 wrote and signed together with some scientists and some rabbis and some philosophers, as well as these Unitarian and Universalist ministers, the first Humanist Manifesto. And that Humanist Manifesto was a declaration that we did not have to live by things we could not believe in. We could live by science. We could live by reason. And look what it had done already. Look, we believed, our humanist spiritual ancestors believed that humanism would become the religion of all the world. And they said so in that first manifesto. In fact, two of this congregation's ministers, the second minister, the Reverend Dr. Frank S.C. Wicks, and then Reverend Burdett Bacchus. The RE wing is named after Reverend Wicks, and the library there is named after Reverend Burdett Bacchus. They were signers of the Humanist Manifesto, now a very important historical document. There have been a couple manifestos since. Then the Reverend Paul Beatty became the national leader of religious humanists because, well, there was a bit of a branching off, let's call it. Religious humanists still said things like in our covenant, like the religious humanists that were so important in the life of all souls. We used words like spirit and love, peace. Other humanists use those words, well, except for one. They don't use spirit. In fact, I know some other humanists who say, you religious humanists, well, I'm not sure you're really humanists. You use words like spirit. You might even use a word like God. And then I'll say, well, actually, I grew up humanist. I still think of myself as a humanist. I also believe in God. And they'll go, you're not, a humanist can't do that. And I said, well, the humanist in me still wakes up every morning and says to the other part of me, you still doing that God thing? Yeah. Ugh, goes the humanist in me. I can't understand that. Don't ask me to explain that either. It's just what happened to me in my life. Not all of our beliefs are beliefs we choose. Sometimes we just get them, I've found. And there are a lot of religious people who just hate humanism. They don't like it because you don't have to believe in a God. You don't have to believe in things that just seem impossible to you. Some of those folks want to pass laws or have passed laws in countries saying, you have to believe this way or you have to believe that way. And as humanists or as a congregation with people of all kinds of beliefs, we know that that's not only not fair, it's actually unwise. But, oh my goodness, it seems like such a huge conflict. People who think you should always believe in God and we have to have laws forcing people to believe in God. And some humanists who say anybody who believes in God is practicing mental illness and is not worthy of being a scientist or anything else. Even some Unitarian Universalists can get kind of unreasonable sometimes. Happens. So, 2 months ago in the New York Times, a news report, the humanist chaplain at Harvard, that was already a big deal, a humanist chaplain at Harvard, doesn't believe in God. He was elected by all the other chaplains to be the head chaplain of Harvard University. And they elected him unanimously. And some of those chaplains are Catholic, evangelical Christians, Jewish rabbis, Buddhists, even some pagans. Chaplain Epstein is a religious humanist. By the way, he wrote a really great book I recommend to you, Good Without God. His appointment was national news because there are some folks who say, Harvard was founded as a Puritan school and it should still always be under the command of God and God's directives. And, well, so All Souls, by the way, it's not just rooted in humanism, but if you take it back far enough, say with Reverend Newton, the first minister of All Souls, who came from Maine and served a congregation that had been started by Puritans. We are actually the Puritans, quite literally. So when Harvard says, well, we can do this, we're like, yo, our spiritual ancestors say yes. The controversy at Harvard, it's not actually that big a deal. It's just nice to be able to put an article out where some people think it is. But you know, he explained something, and it's that difference. It's that kind of humanism that is rooted here in All Souls, that religious humanism. And he said, humanists, you know, we don't look to a God for answers. We are each other's answers. He described how religious humanism is centered in people's relationships with one another. At the core of religious humanism is the living web of relationships, both of humans and of the world around us. Now, not all humanists are religious humanists. In fact, many are not. Some believe that only science can give us any kind of truth, and believe that the single highest value we can have as humanists is the development of the human individual. And some of us here at All Souls are secular humanists. And we are a diverse people. Some of us religious humanists, some of us secular humanists, perhaps a pagan humanist, maybe even a Christian humanist. Some of us may be Universalist Christian. I grew up with a couple of Universalist Christians. They were actually Trinitarians, mind you. We get pretty diverse. So I would never want to argue against a belief you may have, but I do want to, just in fairness and to help understand the kind of humanism that All Souls is rooted in. Secular humanism, as it's described, say, by the American Humanist Association, and you can look up the AHA, the American Humanist Association, on the internet, and they talk a lot about humanism and connect a lot of different kinds of humanists. Their top value is that individual human development. So as grateful as I am for my individual human existence, I hope that I am not the highest example of humanity, because I am far from perfect. In fact, I'm pretty flawed, and actually, I've never met a human being who wasn't pretty flawed, and some human beings are so flawed, I don't know, like the leader of China, or the leader of Russia, one of the leaders of the United States. Just some people are so flawed. I just can't put any individual human really at the pinnacle of our aspirations. So what is it that we long for? The voice of a congregation is so important, especially in that diversity. And we're going to talk more about that across the rest of this winter now that your search committee has talked with you, and they've gotten very busy thinking about how to put that together into materials to interest ministers to come here and serve, be called to All Souls. For myself, when I think about what calls me to life, when I get up in the morning, what makes me take a breath, which is actually why I love the word spirituality. because really it comes from the root meaning of take a breath, of breathing. To breathe, to be in spirit. What makes me want to take a big breath in the morning and say, man, I want to be alive this day. I want to live it. There's a story by Rachel Naomi Raymond in a book she wrote called My Grandfather's Blessings. Her grandfather was a rabbi and a scholar of the Jewish Kabbalah. The rest of her family were socialist physicians, and they considered her grandfather's work and studies to be foolish, magical thinking. But every Friday, Rachel, when she was a little girl, got to go to tea with her grandfather. They would share tea together, and then he would say, "Come, Neshumala, come." And she would stand by him at the table as he sat. He'd put his hand on her head and say a prayer. He would thank God for being a grandfather. And then he would tell God a story about Rachel's life in that week. And then he would give his blessing to her. Rachel Raymond explains that Neshumala means beloved little soul. She said they were the only time in my week when I felt completely safe and at peace. It was those Friday afternoons at tea she learned to see herself through her grandfather's eyes. And she realized that once one is blessed, one is forever blessed. These were important touchstones in her life. Touchstones for me. A touchstone for me is George Whitney, a Unitarian Universalist minister, served my congregation in Columbus. And in that congregation, the building at the time, the side of the sanctuary actually wasn't masonry like this. It was one of those folding doors, like close off the social hall. Not very good at muting sound. Well, I told my Sunday school teacher that I need to use the restroom, and my friend also said, yeah, we need to use the restroom. Okay, you go ahead and use the restroom. We started playing tag in the hallway along that. Oh, that didn't go well. Reverend Whitney, in his academic robe, and just stopped the sermon, apparently to right now I would stop the sermon. He walked out into the hall, saw me, and I'm looking at him like, oh, this is not going well. He grabs my arm and takes me to the director of religious education, the Sarah Cannon of the congregation I was growing up in, and said, deal with this. I was in so much trouble. But after that Sunday, he took me aside and he said, I was upset. I listened as he told me why. But then he invited me to his house. He and his wife did. And he showed me his ham radio set and his model railroad set. I was absolutely captivated with the things he was doing. And the touchstone of the experience was that as imperfect as we may be, as flawed as the decisions we make about our lives may be, there's always reconnection. There's forgiveness, renewal. And what follows can be so amazing. More life than we ever dreamt of. So I had this experience growing up. It wasn't just George Whitney, but it was the people of the congregation. If I was growing up now, I'd be sitting down here, and one of the things I knew about the people of my congregation is how much they loved me. And they showed it many different kinds of ways. Again, an important touchstone, or maybe part of that great touchstone for me. But there were a couple of cars in the parking lot that had a bumper sticker. This one was pretty popular in the late 1960s, early 1970s. You'd see it especially in Unitarian Universalist parking lots. The bumper sticker said, "To question is the answer." I didn't believe that for a minute. Unitarian Universalism wasn't a touchstone for me because I liked to question everything. And in matter of fact, I really loved to question everything. It was a wonderful thing. But what I knew when I went to church was my questions were encouraged. The kinds of questions I could never ask in school. But what I knew that became so much a touchstone for me was that I was loved. I went to church and people knew my name. And they knew that I was that kid that loved questions. I do think that to question is an answer. I mean, that's why I love science. It's all about questions. It's all about doubting. If we're doing science right, it's never being certain about anything. Statistical odds are this is true. We'll hold that true until we come up with a better theory. But you know, I even knew as a kid when my puppy died, my puppy was hit by a car, and I was very sad about that. And one thing that I was very sure of was I just didn't want that stoicism that some of the humanists were recommending. I didn't want a scientific study of how pets die. I wanted to know what I should do with my anger and what I should do with my sadness. And the beloved people of my church did just that. They helped me understand what I could do with that. So years later, I'd finished theological school. I'm serving in my first congregation. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Church was such a touchstone for me. And I get to be up here with you. And we keep getting to do this and make that kind of a place where we all know we're beloved. So I was reading Daniel Dennett. I love his writing. He's a philosopher and actually a philosopher of science. Brilliant thinker. He teaches at Tufts, which was originally a Universalist school in the Boston area. He has great ideas about how people can think together and use reason most powerfully and take what we know from science and use it most effectively. In fact, he loves science so much that in one of his books, he describes science as an imaginary universal acid. In fact, he writes this: universal acid is a liquid so corrosive it will eat through anything. And that means there's a problem. What do you keep it in? It dissolves glass bottles, stainless steel canisters, just as easily as paper bags. What would happen if you somehow created or came upon a dollop of universal acid? Would it just eat everything and eventually eat up the whole world? Now, this universal acid is imaginary, not real. But he uses it as an analogy for the effects of modern science. And he loves science. I love science too. But Professor Dennett thinks that everything at some point must be subject to the judgment of science. You know, it's that questioning again for me. If life is an internal string of questions, which is what science is, if life then is nothing more than acid that pulls apart everything it touches, I'm confused. Why does Professor Dennett ask any question at all? Why do anything? At some point, we choose answers to these questions. And then as it turns out, Professor Dennett also talks about his own touchstone, one of the most important ones, something his universal acid has not, in fact, destroyed. I'm not sure I have the tune to this right, but I'm going to try it. Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the ivy twines. Tell me why the sky's so blue. Then I will tell you just why I love you. Because God made the stars to shine. Because God made the ivy twine. Because God made the sky so blue. Because God made you, that's why I love you. Dennett doesn't believe in that God. In fact, he doesn't believe the universe was created by anyone or anything. But he remembers this song from his childhood, and he says, it still brings a lump to my throat. So sweet, so innocent, so reassuring a vision of life. And it's still a touchstone for him, even though he doesn't believe a word of it. Something that for him, the acid of reason, of science, just won't burn away. I would never suggest that Dennett should believe in God, or that he does in some way. I'm sure that he doesn't, and I'm sure he doesn't need it. He believes what he believes, as any of us do, as any human being does. We have beliefs because of the lives we lived or the aspirations we have. It is, at its heart, something about joy and love. The aspiration to take that love and joy to the world and so that others can experience it too. And in fact, probably extends to his love of a really good question. His thinking is powerful acid. Many things melt away under his powerful reasoning, but he still has his touchstones. Some of us have come from backgrounds where we were expected to carry one kind of a touchstone, if you will. I'm kind of pushing the metaphor a little bit here, but one of the things I've loved about being a Unitarian Universalist for almost all my life is that there have been many profound beliefs that I've had that I've come to understand I don't believe in anymore, and my spirituality has changed dramatically. As I said, part of me is humanist, part of me is theist, and the humanist does. What? Really? And at least being a Unitarian Universalist, I can just live with the complete nonsense of being both. In some ways, perhaps even that's become a touchstone all by itself for me. So Rachel Naomi Raymond writes about the most important touchstone in her life. Only once did she get to go to her grandfather's synagogue. Somehow her family, who she loved very much, but only once did they let her go to the Jewish synagogue where her grandfather was rabbi. She writes about what happened that day. I have a clear memory, clear as a photograph of my grandfather carrying the large Torah, dancing up and down the aisle with it. I had scrambled up and I was standing upon my seat to better see what was happening. And my grandfather suddenly saw me, and he took, as he danced, the Torah and handed it to another man, swept me up in his arms, and danced with me throughout the synagogue. God seemed very close just then. We each of us have our touchstones, some unique, some shared. Perhaps that covenant. I grew up with a covenant very similar to that. It's been a great touchstone. Although I think I disbelieve it about as often as I believe it, or maybe I doubt it. But that touchstone, being the Torah scroll itself and having her grandfather carry her among his beloved people. Such an image. One in which perhaps any of us could be carried by the people gathered here even now. Even though we are Christian or Buddhist, transcendentalist or non-theist or atheist or humanist or pagan or Jew or Muslim, or none of the above, We are our touchstone. By being part of all souls, we can indeed be carried by one another in love around the sanctuary, in worship. We can celebrate the person next to us who's filled with joy in the discovery of a powerful new idea. We can celebrate the man next to us, transported by a prayer to God. We can celebrate the young couple with the new baby, and we can celebrate the elder with years of memories attached to every one of these pews. We'll celebrate the new trees we've planted right after the service, dedicating them. We can be a touchstone for one another and our lives. And after whatever acid burns away what doesn't matter in our lives, we will find what remains for all souls. A joy in seeking truth, the rewards of serving one another, and our lives becoming so beautiful as they're guided by love. Excuse me. And so I wanted to sing this hymn. It's a favorite of humanists throughout the Unitarian Universalist Association. It's to a tune known as Finlandia. And I don't know, can you play it with us? Ooh, wonderful. I don't have to lead you all then. And so I'll put my mask on. Just stand if you're able. We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. Would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which bends our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service with love and justice strive to make us free. Go now into the world that's looking for this freedom, that's looking for the light we symbolize by this chalice, a world that desperately needs it, a world that needs love, that needs truth, that needs to remember service. Go in peace and be in peace. We'll be together again.
First, Nasreen Khan would appreciate it if I would say thank you to all the people who attended our young adult campfire this past weekend. Turnout was lovely, and it was perhaps heard that someone uttered, "I didn't know there were that many younger adults here in the congregation." So thank you so much for supporting that important aspect of our programming. We also wanted to make sure that you knew that if you were someone who was involved in planting some of the lovely trees that make up our All Souls Grove out here on the grounds, that there's going to be a brief blessing ceremony immediately after the service, and you can meet back here under the tents. Lastly, we do have our monthly All Souls Youth Hike today from noon to 2. If you're planning to attend that, please meet us at Parking Site 2, which is the Pleasant Run Trail parking lot just down the road here, next to the Walmart at 56th and Emerson. You have connection cards in the aisles that you can fill out if you're here in person this weekend. And if not, please do maintain the linkages that connect you to the touchstone of this community by reaching out to the relevant staff members with any pastoral needs or concerns that you may have. Thank you.